time is early in the meeting before the board votes, and you may speak about any item that is on tonight's agenda. Towards the end of the meeting, there's another public comment period to address any topic that you choose. When you come to the microphone, please state your name and address and sign in. And please keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Okay, the next item on the agenda is our student representative, RJ Milligan.
Hi, everybody. There's not all that much to report. We academically, all the classes are starting to kind of get in the groove. The students are learning what the teachers want from them. The kids are starting to get to know each other more, and the classes are just going a lot more smoothly. And we're just starting to get into that groove kind of. And last weekend, the girls soccer won our co-champs for the state, so we're all really excited about that. And girls volleyball also won their TOC, so we all kind of rallied around them, and that was great for the student body. And now we're heading into the winter seasons with sports, and this Friday already, hockey's having their first game, and they won the championship last year, and we're rooting for them to have another championship season this year. But that's really all that's going on right now in the school.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, RJ.
Thanks, RJ.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is a board presentation, so I'm going to have the board go down and sit in the audience and bring your hard copies.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It was September 25th. We were looking back when Mr. Miziak and Mr. Blender came to share with us their presentation on where we were with the research that they had done in our student device initiative, which is taking a look at the devices that we provide the students for computing purposes. And they gave us a presentation on September 25th. That presentation generated some questions and some action items. So we've taken the last couple months to take care of some of those things, and they are back tonight to give us an update of where we stand at this point. So Mr. Miziak and Mr. Blender, thank you for being here.
So thank you very much, Mr. Markarian. Good evening, Mr. Syatt, members of the Board of Education. As Mr. Markarian just said moments ago, this is our second presentation this year. So to get right into it, we're going to give you a quick overview. We're going to recap as much as we can in a nutshell from that 925 presentation. We're going to talk what has happened since then, and probably the biggest thing we'll spend the most amount of time on is response to the questions that we had received since that 925 presentation. So in diving right into it, I know that the font may, especially for those people seated in the very back, be a little tight, but we wanted to kind of condense what was about 25, 30 slides into this single thing with the most amount of information possible. This is the proposal that we presented last time at the 925 meeting. You can see there the different years of the rollout. It is a 4-year plan. As proposed, it is to start in grades 3 to 5, replacing the existing Chromebooks with new devices, and taking the existing fleet and spacing them out across WAMS and Ridge to increase them as well. In year 2, we then go to year 2 of K-5. Can everyone hear me okay? Mr. Markarian just brought a battery with another microphone. Can you guys hear me in the back? Excellent. So in year 2, you can see that we're in year 2 for the K-5 on their new devices. moving one-to-one with new devices at the middle school, and then the aging devices, which are really pushed to the limitations of their viability, are put exclusively at the high school. That would be the final year of BYOD at the high school as we phase that out. Then in year 3 of the plan, we're in year 3 of the new devices for the elementary school, year 2 for the middle school, and the first year of new devices at the high school, the existing fleet that we currently have in service being completely phased out in year 3, as well as no more BYOD at Ridge High School. Year 4 then is the evaluation year. It would be the final year of viability on the devices for the elementary school dating back to year 1, and then year 3 and year 2, so on. As presented, you can see the associated costs there. Those costs, to clarify, are the cost of new devices, new storage and transportation carts to house those devices when charging, and associated softwares. We used GoGuardian as our price base, although it's not really an official, that's the one, but that was our price point, software and security monitoring packages. Anything that is routine or already budgeted for, such as upgrades to the access points or upgrades to the backbone, the servers, the switches, all the technical stuff that Mr. Blinder could tell you a lot more about, that's not part of this. This is solely about the device fleet that we have in the classroom and what it would take to replace them and really bring them up to meet our needs as identified by the steering committee. You can see down the bottom here that that has an annual average cost of $430,637. In comparison, if we just maintained and replaced every device that we have, student device, that is every Chromebook currently in service, whether it was bought by the BOE or bought by the PTO, they are aging out. They have a 4-year lifespan. That is the shelf life of a Chromebook before they become essentially defunct. Replacing all those devices just to maintain our current level of access, which, as I stated in that presentation, wasn't meeting our instructional needs, that carries an estimated cost of $258,382. So to go from our current level of access to the increased level of access proposed would average $172,000 annually based on the numbers that we had run prior to Mr. Blinder joining us when his predecessor, Mr. Barone, and I had inventoried everything that we looked at. Obviously, if you start to change the devices or start to change things, those numbers do vary a little bit. So I equated it to buying a car. If you're quoting a car and then you start adding leather seats and a sunroof and all these other features, you start to change that number. So we had done this based on comparable model devices to what we have. If you replace a Chromebook with a $2,500 Mac Air, obviously my numbers are way, way off. So an overview of what has happened since. We had classroom visit opportunities set up so that the Board of Ed could see what a one-to-one looks like in action in different classrooms across the district. I see that you're taking a picture of this. We do post it to the website. It'll probably come out a lot clearer. You're welcome to take the picture, and I'll step out of the way if you need, but it'll make it a lot easier to pull it from the website, plus that the backgrounds are actually a nice rich green, which does not transfer well over the LCD, so it will look nice and clean when you pull it. But you can see some of the different classrooms that we had the opportunity for the Board of Ed to visit there. We tried to mix it up as much as possible across the different grade bands to see a bunch of different samplings of lessons. For the examples, without getting too specific as to what each teacher was doing in those classes, the main things we saw, an entire class being posed a question and getting immediate feedback within seconds from an entire population of students. Back when I was in the classroom, we would do an exit ticket where each kid was given a note card and you collected that note card, and then the next day they would get feedback and they would know exactly how they did. And human developmental psychology tells us that if a child puts an answer on that card, they do it because they thought that was right, or at least somewhat right. And there's a 24-hour lag, at least, sometimes, in the case of like the Thanksgiving break we just went through, significantly longer, that the child moves forward perceiving that the thing that they walked away with is the correct understanding, waiting for that feedback. With the technology in the hands of the teachers, they get that feedback in seconds, and the teachers can make an informed decision about, okay, I've got 2 kids who need a little bit of help, or I've got 20 kids out of a class of 24 that need a little bit of help. Do I move forward with the lesson? Do I circle the wagons? Do I change what I'm about to do? Not possible without the technology. The student devices were used to access resources in real time, much better than the textbooks on the shelf, the information infinitely at your fingers. We hear it all the time. That's a great question. Go Google it. The kids working on projects and working with their peers had an infinite amount of resources at their disposal to work on whatever the project would be it something in AP Bio, middle school Spanish, anywhere in between. And then the students being able to work at their own pace. When the students were working on something individually, they were given a list of assignments. Here it is, here's what you have to accomplish, here's the criteria that you have to accomplish. Within that, you have free creative realm. Go, and you see kids working through things at their own speed, at their own ability, learning things their own way. And because it's on the device, the teacher is able to monitor and see, looking, okay, I've got to make my way over here. They're falling behind the pace in this section. Let me work with them. They're flying ahead. They're doing just fine. They're a little off task. Let me address them. The ability to monitor a class of 24 students infinitely increased with those devices. So the takeaways from the classroom visit, a lot of times, the feedback I got is they were shocked that with the devices, they weren't used the entire class period. And that was completely accurate to what I was expecting, is that we're using the devices when they significantly enhance instruction. We don't want them to be the $400 pencil and piece of paper. We want them to provide access to something that otherwise could not be accomplished. As was noted the last time I presented, there is a learning curve there where some staff are much further along in that process than others, and that's something that we'll be circling back to with our need. The students discussed and collaborated. There were times where screen time was very, very minimal, but despite the device being there. One device, 2 students, a lot of peer-peer collaboration with that just being a tool that was there with the rest of the lab, the rest of the activity, so forth, so on. The level of engagement was very high. Students were very creative, doing things that otherwise they would not be able to do. And the lesson in this case, this is something that really stood out, was that we don't have one-to-one access at this time. Those lessons happen at specific days and specific times, not based on, hey, this is the best time for me to teach this lesson. It was, this is the best time for me to teach this lesson, that the technology was available to me. And we discussed that as part of those visits, that technology isn't always there. And sometimes things happen where we have to wait a day or two to do an activity, or maybe push it up a day or two, because we want to make sure we have the access to the technology, and it's not necessarily the optimal timing of the delivery of that content. Would you like to add anything to those things before I rip on? I know I'm trying to get to the Q&A as fast as possible.
I think you covered it all.
So, some additional takeaways, the ability to monitor student feedback and student learning and feedback. I don't know if any board members were with me for this particular visit because I pop in and out of classes so frequently, but we have software pushed out through Google Classroom that allows the teacher to lock out the student screens. So the student screens all go blue, and they're focused on the teacher doing something, receiving direction, and that distraction of having that monitor there and the kid just wanting to keep working on in their little zone. We can completely control that with our own devices, and we have the ability to lock that out and really, refer to as a garden wall, control the content that they have access to, the things that they are working on, and really wrangle them in infinitely better than a device that they have come into the classroom with that we don't have software on, that we can't lock down. Because as I had noted in my previous presentation, if this is my own device, I don't have to use the school's network. I can just turn my phone into a hotspot and totally bypass all security protocols. Something we know does happen to a certain extent, and that does provide a limited ability for us to optimize the use of those devices. That brings me to, with RHS, the BYOD does mask our functionality. We would see a cart of 30 Chromebooks, and some of them would be out and some of them would still be there because we had an array of devices in the classroom. That is sometimes a little stressful on our staff to not know how to troubleshoot some of the other devices, some of the other softwares. Mr. Blinder could tell you, he's not the geek squad. If a student brings a device in and it has an issue, his techs cannot solve that for them. There's a lot of liabilities there. That is just a dead device for us. And if that teacher was doing what we call shadow sharing, where 2 teachers have scraped together as many devices as they can from the unused Chromebooks in other signed out carts, they're relying on student access. And if the student access is also down, the student-owned devices, it does limit their ability. And it is some of the suffering we see right now with our current model that we are really just trying to scrape by with that current level of access. I like this last quote, and I do paraphrase, but following one of the visits, this was pseudo-said. I apologize if I'm slightly off. The classroom looks very different today than it did when I was in school. But if it looked the same, we probably would not be the great district that we are. And I think that was very telling of how we have evolved in the classroom and how the instructional experience has evolved. And that brings us back to the recommendation of the Tech Steering Committee. We see a lot of value in the appropriate use of technology, but we are at this headway that our current level of access has created glass ceiling where we are struggling to get to that next level because we don't have access to the devices when they would be most appropriate. So the questions. Why start with K-5? So I know it's loaded. Ridge has to go last. If I am the parent of a freshman who just purchased a $2,500 device, I would be extremely upset to hear that that device will now no longer be allowed to come to school. And to change the rules of the game midway through the game is a little unfair. So it has the heaviest usage, which is currently buffered out by the BYOD. While we test our infrastructure and build up our infrastructure, we do need to give the public a heads up that the devices you're purchasing will have a date that they will no longer be able to come to Ridge and be used. For WAMs, their Chromebook use actually surpasses Ridge because they don't have a BYOD. They are using those machines essentially every period, every day, to the limit of their capabilities. Again, heavy usage. We need some time to assess infrastructure and make sure that it's going to be able to handle the weight that we're about to put on it if we add additional devices. At the 4 elementaries, we have a couple of issues to look at. There is a disparity. Some buildings have more technology than others right now. We also have an issue where the PTO has provided devices. The Board of Ed has provided devices. They were purchased at different times. We have different types of devices, different types of hardware, and that is hard for a technician who goes between 2 elementaries. We have 2 level 1 techs across the 4 elementaries. So they share time, and they're maintaining a bunch of different devices. And when something goes wrong with one, when you're maintaining a fleet of different machines, it's a little more logistically challenging to maintain that fleet as it would be if we streamlined to a single, this is the device, no matter what building, they all have X amount of Y device. It would solve a lot of our issues, which is why the K-5 was targeted first. Their usage is also lower than the other 2 buildings, so it allows us to test our infrastructure. So what about those devices purchased by the PTO? Thank you. That's a huge, from every teacher that has worked with them, from the administration who has seen the teachers benefit from, thank you. I have to say that, thank you. We are struggling with the inequity in access and the differences in the devices just to maintain them. Further, as I already said, a Chromebook has a 4-year shelf life, and we are approaching the end of that. A 6-8 student is more tech savvy than a K-5 student, and they have a little bit better ability to troubleshoot. If we take the existing fleet K-5 and push it up to 6-8, we feel confident in our ability to stretch the life of those devices beyond their advertised 4-year shelf life and just get as much bang for our buck out of them as we possibly can. And we wouldn't be proposing doing that if we weren't proposing replacing every one of those devices and then some with new devices. But could that plan be adjusted if we weren't in love with starting at the K-5 band? Mr. Blinder, you spoke to this very, very eloquently, that we're talking about rolling out a plan across 4 buildings of low usage, but if you have a network issue, it's 4 buildings. So the alternative plan would be to swap the middle school and the 4 elementaries in the sequence. No matter how you slice this, Ridge with its BYOD and network needs has to be the last one. That is year 3, no matter how we tinker with the plan. But we could invert years 1 and 2. So as it was proposed, the K-5 would go first, middle school would go second. The adjustment would be to flip them. And I have here some of the pros and cons. The pro to the flip is that you have a single rollout site. If we are having issues, you have a site with a dedicated tech, that it would be easy to free up one of the techs from the high school or bring in one of the techs from the elementary, because it's one site that if you have an issue, you could resolve. Versus if you roll out 4 buildings with 2 floating techs, that's where we're going to see some strain. So that was a huge plus that we had looked at if we made that change. We still do nothing to address the logistics. And yes, we are doing a harder test of the network in comparison to a rollout at a lower use grade band. As Mr. Markarian put it when we planned this, it really is 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Each has its pros and cons. We are flexible, and it really comes down to the need. We need to increase our level of tech access. If doing that makes more sense to do it 6-8 first, the committee says, fine, let's do that. If we are good with the plan as proposed, fine, let's do that. But there is some wiggle within this plan to make sure that we do meet all the needs that we identified. So there were questions about professional development that came up last time. The first one, I believe, actually came from the public commentary at the end of the presentation, was could we get the devices in the teacher's hands? Yes, that does involve some planning. That needs to make sure that our purchasing timeline allows them to come in. As you know, our fiscal year opens up July 1, so to cut the check July 1, we're going to have a lag. They won't come in until midsummer. So we'd have to make sure that the way that we do this, we work with the vendor to say, hey, look, here's how this works. We need to get it as quickly as possible, have as many things in place as possible so that we can have those devices in, have them prepped, and have a sign-out system for teachers that wanted to familiarize themselves with the device the students would have to be able to come in and sign them out for the summer. But that really is a timeline thing more than anything else as far as aligning with the vendor and working with the business administrator to make that partnership work and that timing work. Because to receive the devices end of July, to then prep them and get them out, there's really not a big window remaining in the summer to allow the teachers enough time to do that. So it's doable, but it's more so a timeline planning thing than anything else. What would the PD plan look like? And in a word, it is extensive. A lot of it is turnkey and using the time we already have and the staff we already have to provide meaningful development to the teachers. The key there, I think, really being to differentiate in small groups. To have a room that, hey, we are going to do expert level Google Classroom training in this room, but we're going to have novice level in this room, limiting class size, using the experts we have, and making sure that people are in an environment that's right for them. I would not feel comfortable in the same classroom as Mr. Blinder. I'm pretty good. He's superb. One of us is not being served in that professional development environment. But if you split us in different rooms and everybody in that room is at about my level and we're all working towards the same goals, I'm really going to walk out of there very, very well served. And that would be the plan. And we could do that leveraging the time that we already have built in with department time, half day in service, full day in service, staff college, and so on. We also have the ability to build in drop-in support with some of the staff we already have with some of their free time. And that would be another huge option for that one-on-one of, hey, I'm really struggling with this one thing. Could you help me with, and making time and having that one-on-one support for those staff. Again, all using the existing people that we have on hand to provide that support. Should the plan allow the 912 devices to travel home? I threw a lot at this bullet point because a lot of it pulls from what the survey had told us. Our community as a whole expressed a lot of concern over students being liable for devices and traveling with them, especially when I have X amount of computers at home. My child does not need to bring yet another device into my home. To circle and kind of cut this to a short, sweet point, down the bottom there, we're not there today. To say, starting next fall, we're going to send devices home with students, we are not there. Every data point we're able to collect tells us we're not there. We may be someday. And as this plan rolls out, and as we evolve, and as we prepare to phase out BYOD, as we get ready, we may actually be at a point that year 3 plan does evolve. It's kind of hard to predict that 3 years out. I will say this, and be very honest, that as we talk numbers, the number to do classroom carts is actually higher than if we just assigned a device to each student. Because when you do classroom carts, you have devices sitting there. You have a classroom of 24 students and 30 Chromebooks. You have some spares that are sitting stagnant. You have some classes that are 20 or 17 just based on enrollment and interest in scheduling. You have stagnant devices during that time of day. A cart-based system where they stay in the room actually incurs a higher cost, but we made that proposal based on the feedback of the community is not ready for those devices to travel home. However, we are flexible and we want to be fiscally responsible. If it comes to the point that it's, hey, we're getting ready to do this and it looks like our students at the high school are ready to be assigned a device and carry that device home and carry that device throughout the day responsibly, we can evolve that plan. So the big question is, what if we cannot afford the numbers that I put forward? Obviously, we need to make cuts. I mean, that is a no-brainer. And making those cuts, it would be tough, but there are some things prioritized that we'd have to address. Obviously, the priority has to be 612. It's where the usage is the heaviest. It's where we are straining and struggling just to get by. Again, WAMs on the surface more so than Ridge, because Ridge usage is masked by the BYOD policy in place. That BYOD, though, has to absolutely go. We are running into so many logistical, security, and SEL issues with devices that we cannot ultimately lock down at the end of the day. The equity also has to be a concern. And as we look at usage by department and usage by grade band, the evolution of that plan, if the number I propose is too high for us and we have to scale back, the plan would scale back with equity at the different grade bands to ensure that we are addressing all the needs we identified, and we're not just throwing everything at 9th grade English or 7th grade science, that there is a plan that all the teachers at the grade bands will get an appropriate use of access. There's another cost saving hidden in there, as I talked at the very start about what those numbers entailed. We had projected purchasing as part of the purchase brand new carts. Well, if we are buying to replace existing devices, those devices already have a cart. So if we take the existing cart and strip them and take the existing machines and the existing chargers out, we have a box for storage that is still a viable box for storage that does cut our cost. They have been beat up. I don't know how flexible they are as far as, if each model of cart we have, if the dividers can be moved, if they can appropriately house whatever new device would be going in there. That's a logistical thing we would have to look at. But if the number came back and said, hey, we can't buy the custom cart that goes with this machine, perhaps we could save some money by not buying the cart and using the thing we have and getting by with that. There is some flexibility within the proposal. If our need, if our financial need is here, we can scale back and ensure that we can do the best we can with the money that we can allocate. So I have a lot of acknowledgments that I want to make sure that I touch upon, because this is a process that started a little over a year ago, and a lot of people have put a lot of time. First off, the teachers, the constant feedback that they have given, be it in department meetings or their PLCs with their peers, their team meetings, they have been very, very open and honest about what's going on, and it's been immensely helpful. The administrative team has been equally supportive as far as allowing us to come in, poke, prod, continually ask questions. They have been outright stellar. The Board of Education, you guys have really, like I said, this is the second presentation this year. I think the fourth one I've done on this topic. You have done a great deal of diligence and really sat through, and it's really appreciated. And then lastly, all the volunteers who served on the tech steering committee have put in hours upon hours, and I really am grateful for all their work. And then very lastly, Mr. Alex Blinder stepped into this at the end of August and was told, hey, you have this giant thing and you're going to be asked a lot. Behind the scenes, he has done so much heavy lifting and logistical and catching up to all the work that we had done. It really amazes me that he's actually physically standing here and not just on the ground overwhelmed in his office. He's done so much. It's been a very, very large effort, and I really do thank everyone that's been involved. So at that time, thank you all very much, and I guess we are ready for the next round of questions following that Q&A.
Just for the record, I did have to go get Alex off the floor earlier today.
My first question is just a logistical one about the high school. So if the students arrive at school in first period and they leave school from ninth period, which is quite likely not the same classroom, where are these individually assigned rather than cart stored devices going to go, and how will they get charged?
So that was, when we went on visits, one of the things that the committee liked but we ruled out was the system in, I believe it was Branchburg, where students actually returned at the end of the day back to their first period and tucked them away in a charging dock that was in that room. They ate a little bit of time on that. It's a smaller building with a much smaller population. While it looked like a great idea, it's just not a viable system for us. We would more so be looking at, if we assign devices to students, it would be theirs, much like my laptop is assigned to me. It goes home, I charge it on my time wherever I can, and that is a logistical concern of when you assign a device. What if you're halfway through period 3 and device dies and child has left charger at home? How do you deal with that? Or if child sits, where you're sitting here, there is no outlet. Do I totally rearrange the seating structure because that child now needs to charge a device? It does bring up an interesting logistical concern. For the districts that assign devices, they said that was part of the growing pains, but it quickly phased itself out of, similar to a child charges their phone before leaving the house every day. They charge the devices, and if they see that they are running down, they'll come into period 4 and say, hey, my battery's running low, can I just tuck this on the shelf over there? And they'll then take their seat. And if they start to use it in class, go get it. That was kind of an organic thing that each building kind of learned how to deal with assigned devices on their own, but there were certainly some speed bumps that they addressed up front. So.
I'm a little more confused than I was a second ago.
Not a problem.
I thought that we were saying the community was not in favor of sending the Chromebooks home with.
We are not, so I responded to, if we do it, there's a lot of logistical concern,
Okay.
which is why we lean towards the cart-based system. So if you come into period 1, there is a cart in period 1, you take device when needed, return device, proceed to period 2. Where there is another cart where you take a device as needed, return device. They stay within the rooms, so we don't have any liability, any transit issues, any charging issues, because they charge while they're in their docks.
Okay, gotcha.
I'm sorry, I thought you were asking me, if they travel, what are some of the issues? And that is where I went down that rabbit hole.
I
My
understand.
apologies.
And that's okay. So, then there wouldn't be a cost savings because we would need to get the carts, correct?
Correct. That's
Okay.
so if the plan evolves, that's a hidden cost savings, which I had noted. If we approach year 3 and decide we want to make a change, there's actually a hidden cost saving if. But that's not the proposal at this time, because we don't feel like we're ready, and I don't think we're going to grow. And when I say I'm speaking on behalf of all the research of the 30 members of the committee. We didn't think we would be there in 3 years.
Okay, so then I just have another question. I'm really stuck on this, and maybe you can help me. There's a lot of classes at Ridge High School that it's highly unlikely on a routine basis, and I'm going to pick on Woods. How often are they going to use a Chromebook in the classroom? And do we really need to assign them to 1,800 and whatever kids if at any given point during the day? They're in lunch, they're in their elective, they're in PE.
So if we tried to get creative with the numbers and said, okay, we have a period where there's kids in lunch, you have to come up with an exchange system where a student is, dropping off a device and another child picking it up. It's a logistical conundrum, but so that one would be really complex and hard to manage. But to your point, when we did our projections for those costs, we are not including the Woods Room. There were a couple art rooms at Ridge, the same thing at Annan, where we know that there is just next to zero likelihood that a child would take out a device next to a bandsaw or next to whatever, the pottery wheel. So there are some classrooms that did not. With that said, there were some health rooms where, we projected a cart of 30, and sometimes our numbers don't balance nicely in health, and we may actually exceed 30 in a health class. So with that particular class, we may have to go up. But as some of the board members you saw, the one science room, we max at 24. So 30 is high there. So we use 30 as a safe estimate. We did automatically pull back from select rooms such as that, which, woodshop, art, and actually the robust labs. Like the Mark Dada has an engineering room that is going to keep desktops. They are not part of the plan as well because we have different needs there. And that's not part of the cost either because we've already accounted for, there's a cyclical refresh on those labs. So this is solely talking about replacing the existing carts with a comparable newer model and adding more of that model so that each, instructional classroom, traditional classroom has a cart in it.
Okay, that was going to be my question, if there was a way to determine which classrooms the use would be either a necessity or just the highest likelihood.
So we actually took the fire map for Ridge and WAMS when we did this and color coded them. It's actually a little easier at the elementaries because the rooms are designed for special. So that's an easy count. If you have 5 fifth grade teachers, you have 5 classrooms that need it. It's a little bit different at Ridge because we have teachers moving in and out, but we color coded the fire maps based on what we knew the rooms to be. And when we did that, we excluded. So on the document that I had worked on with Chris Barone and had shared with Dr. Heineman and Mr. Syatt and Mr. Markarian, we had a count that was classrooms at Ridge based on that instructional usage. The traditional desk, whether it's an Italian classroom period 1 and then a Spanish period 2, or a science room, or whatever. Not those art, not those wood shop, not those specialty rooms.
Yeah, I think you're sort of asking what I was thinking was, if it's not going to be assigned one-to-one, a device to each child, then you have to figure out, how many of them you need where. And so then I guess the question is, does it come out to exactly one-to-one or different? You know what I mean? Because theoretically, if you were inefficient in where they were in the classrooms and where the kids were going versus lunch or something, it could be more than one-to-one, or it could be a lot less when you're considering a lot of the kids are going to be in lunch and other classes that aren't using them. You know what I mean? So
I would say that the one-to-one is looking at that instructional environment. And at any given moment, in any classroom,
right.
Because we have classes running 1 through 9.
But if you're trying to say how many would you have to purchase at Ridge High School to have a one-to-one environment, it might not be the exact same number as the number of students.
Correct.
Right.
It is not.
Right. Okay. That was the question, I think. Just one comment about the high school. If they were at some point to take them home, there would have to be enough advanced warning to parents because you wouldn't want people to go and buy their 8th grader a laptop, you know what I mean, and then find out 6 months later. So that would definitely have to be something that.
And that falls in line with why Ridge
Why
is
you
towards
won't
the
be
end of
ready,
the
why you
cycle and
wouldn't
if
be
the plan
ready.
evolves.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. One question about the numbers in the beginning, the dollars. You had said it doesn't include the stuff about increasing the network and things like that. So I know those things will be, some of those things we're already doing. We have to, even just for our existing technology. So those numbers, I guess, will be part of the budget and finance. But my question is, just if we did this full plan, or if we did a little bit less, would that price be very different? I'm just trying to guess if that's going to cost more. We have to do it anyway, clearly.
So I know Alex was curious when we talked about that. Our pricing did include what we called white glove service, and I think you're skeptical of that. So I think that's something that we looked at, how much of that do we really need? Mm-hmm. And that is, device comes out of box. The vendor did something to it for you versus our techs having a setup time. We have that cost in there, and that is obviously a per device cost. So if we start adjusting the number, you start changing the devices, that's a cost that's going to vary. The Go Guardian software that we priced into that, which is the security and monitoring package, that doesn't change regardless. So that number is whether we increase, decrease, or stay the same. We're looking to increase our security. So that's a cost that no matter how we roll forward is part of having devices in the district. So really the biggest driving factor is how many devices and what model device. So we looked at I would say if you look at mid-level devices, a low-end mid-level device. If we can get by with something maybe a little bit less at the K-5 to give us wiggle room higher up, that's where this number is a little gray because we haven't yet started to vet the devices. So that's where the most amount comes in. Now, as I talked with Mr. Markarian, that number can't go up, $100,000. Like, oops, sorry, we miscalculated. Like, it is a tight number. And that's where, like I said, if you came back and said, hey, we'd really like to do MacBooks. No, we are looking at, bottom of the mid-grade device, and quantity is really what's going to drive that. But there's always licensing like Microsoft Office and things of that nature that just kind of fall into that. I know that you don't put Office on a Chromebook, but if you look at a different device, we looked at some softwares that go with that, and that's where the number will hover a little bit and fluctuate.
Okay. And I had one more question. I know a couple board members had asked me, and I sort of remember from a previous, I don't know if it was in the presentation or in the tech committee, what the ratio currently is in the buildings. It's about 2-to-1, but we know there's a discrepancy with Mount Prospect. So I guess what's the difference there between, and are the other elementaries all
So what's the
equivalent?
discrepancy at the elementaries?
Yeah.
Cedar Hill and Oak Street in grades 3 to 5 are very nearly 1-to-1. But with that, the devices are practically dedicated 3-5. It is like finding a 4-leaf clover when a first grade or second grade teacher is able to pry one of those carts away for a lesson. So that's where their equity issues come in. But yes, it is a lot easier if you are a 4th grade teacher to have technology. If you're at Cedar Hill or Oak Street, Liberty Corner's close. It's like a half step behind, but Mount Prospect has absolutely the worst access to the devices.
So if we did the plan that was flopped to have William Annan first, then you could use the old Chromebooks to fix that discrepancy during that first year.
So yeah,
somewhat?
so if we did Annan first, the modified plan, we would be taking the existing fleet at Annan and pushing it down to K-5 and up to Ridge. We would do that in such a way that probably a bulk of that fleet is going to Mount Prospect to fix their equity issue. Everywhere would see an increase, but the greatest increase on that version is Mount Prospect.
In thinking about your description, and you were talking about needing time to assess and build infrastructure, so do you foresee being able to do that with your existing staff? Or do you feel like you might need to enhance your staff in order to accomplish this?
We're going to use existing staff, but we're also going to rely on outside consultants.
Okay.
For example, the RF study requires specialized equipment and software. It would be too costly for us to purchase. So the approximate cost to do RF study per school is about $3,000. And we would do it for each school. And that's our next step.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with your assessing and building the infrastructure, I would imagine there would be some additional cost with that, but you're not able to really give a hard number now. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
Elementary schools are in pretty good shape.
Okay.
I don't expect a lot of changes or upgrades or significant costs there. Middle school, because of the number of devices and how we want to increase the devices, I think we're going to need some significant upgrades, and certainly high school down the road.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have anything, Rhonda? No?
Can I just ask one more quick
Absolutely.
question, and I'll pass the mic down? In the high school, you mentioned with the BYOD that if students are bringing their own laptop, for example, that it's difficult to prevent them from having access to things you don't want them to have access to. Is it, and you said something about making a hotspot, is it not possible if you're using a district-issued Chromebook to use your phone as a hotspot?
Correct.
Okay.
So I have administrative privileges on my device, but if I was a student, I could not take this home and just add my home network to that device, just like I could not add my cell phone as a network. It would only connect to BTSD. That's a security setting that we have. So that's how we would stop that from I guess, bypassing or working around that security setting. to be clear, it's against FCC regulations to block a kid's cell phone. So we can't just like, oh, flip a switch and now the kid can't turn their phone into a hotspot. That's not something you can do. So the only thing you really can do is say, well, what can I do to stop them from bypassing our network in that capacity? And that is provide the device that won't even talk to the cell phone.
Hi, okay. I had a couple of questions. One was about the cost. Now, you're saying that you're costing out at the lower end of the spectrum, say, but you haven't really decided what you thought the best device would be. Now, and you would be able to use different devices like in the grammar school and the high school if it came down to it, but then you couldn't share them or couldn't pass them up or couldn't, you know.
So with part of the issue being the maintenance of a fleet, it is absolutely preferable to say K-5 we use this version of a device, and 6-8 we use this version of device, and 9-12 we use this version of a device. Even if we were buying the same device on a 3-year plan, you're looking at the 2018 model, the 2019 model, the 2020 model. There's going to be slight variances, again, just like there are with cars. When you wait a year, they change something. With that said, when I had some members come with me to classroom visits, I showed them some of the devices that we had used for the quote. I believe one was a Chromebook and one was a low-end, I believe an Acer Windows machine. Just to kind of show price point, they're pretty comparable. Alex could speak very more about the specifics of that Acer probably wouldn't get it done at the high school because the kids would max out the memory and it would be a not viable device for them. But on a more cloud-based system where we weren't doing that to the machine, either one of those devices would work. So there's certainly some give and take with vetting the devices. And that again is why as we go through this, to test at the softer level, the K-5, if we pick a device and we're like, oh, this is working for K-5, but we're really pushing it to its limits, obviously we have to pick a different device for 6-8 or we're going to be investing in something that doesn't meet our needs. That is another benefit to going with the K-5 first. However, we could just say, hey, we have time. Let's start to vet a device that we feel good about now if we're going to do 6-8, but we would really need to start that relatively quickly to get that ball rolling.
Okay, because if we had to start at, forget K-5, let's say, okay?
So focus on 6-8.
I just forget K-5 because, just for price, cost for, do they really need all this technology in K through 5? Where I see the high school as the place where they, for the most part, would need it. Is there a way, and I know that you're saying that we have our bring your own device to school and stuff, but, if we're going to do this and spend the money, I think people would understand. I mean, if you bought a laptop, you can use a laptop at home. And I'm not talking about people taking their stuff home. But is there a way to do a focused, if you had like a dream, you could say, okay, these are the best devices. We were going to keep it to the high school, and we were going to be very focused about where they need the devices. And I'm talking about everyone carrying them around. I'm talking about even just in certain classrooms where, they're used a lot. Like if you could get like a laptop for I don't know, for where they really need it. I'm talking about like the science classes, maybe, I don't know, I guess maybe math, or wherever they were really heavy use of a device, that they really needed a device. Like, is there a way to do it that way? A very focused approach where you can get better devices that would be, I don't know, I'm just talking about.
So I think what you're saying is, like, if you came up with pot of money, and instead of dispersing that money evenly across those grade bands, targeting, let's say, the high school, or 7-12, or, picking, as far as we can get, as deep as we can get, starting 12th grade and working backwards,
With the money we have even, I'm just like talking about I'm talking instead of a blanket approach with Chromebooks, which I love the Chromebooks. I just don't think they're a great thing to have to invest all of our money in. But I also don't believe we need it from 3 to 12 either. So, I'm saying that where we get the more bang for our buck with the technology that we would be able to get.
I would have to say that based on all the research that the committee did, we are struggling K to 12 with our access. So that is the feedback from the students, from the teachers, even from some of the parent surveys. We know that one was the most divisive from the presentation I want to say it was May of last year, where it was, almost 50-50 in favor of access that low versus not. So it's tough to answer your biggest bang for the buck question when across the board, our current level of device access is not getting it done for us. But if you came back and said, based on all of our conversations, it is a priority for us to get at least this level of device at the high school, we would have to make adjustments to the plan based on that. I don't honestly know what that device would, what that device would be and what you're trying to do with that device, because again, part of our plan is maintaining those robust labs for CAD and the video and film editing softwares, as well as.
We already have that, though.
We do, we are, so we'd be maintaining those and.
Right, we have to maintain that, and that's in the budget, and that's already.
That's part of a cyclical refresh,
That's something
separate
that's
of these
already-
numbers.
That's being paid for already.
So there's no real need, for example, like I have, a pretty robust Lenovo, flips over into a tablet, does things that are really great. Very honestly, I could get by with a lower device, and I do put a lot, I hook this device up and have multiple monitors, and I'm really going deep with Excel and using the full statistical package on that, and because of how we run so much on more of a cloud-based system with Google, I could get by with a lower grade device. And I think that's where, as we look at it, like, yes, I would love to have the ridiculous alien software thing that does everything under the sun, but do I really need it? Absolutely not. And I think that's part of the issue with, every teacher would tell you, like, oh yeah, if you give the kids this, I could do this amazing thing. You could actually do that amazing thing with a device that's a couple steps down from the, everything with the bells and whistles. So to try to answer your question, if you say, hey, I'm going to throw all the money at the world at you at this grade band, yeah, we'd spend it, but I don't know if that's a wise approach, because I think we would end up investing in something that surpasses our need and starves us in another area. Does that make sense?
I wanted to respond to that, because I went on the site visit to Pascack Valley, where they had Macs in the high school. So at first I'm like, wow, that looks really cool and everything. And yeah, they can do things that a Chromebook can't do. But when we talked to the students, they were taking them home. But a lot of the students said, well, I still need to have another device at home so I can watch Netflix and stuff. So I put my two computers next to each other, and like when I'm doing my homework. So I thought, if the parents are going to be buying one anyway, does it make sense for the district to be spending that much money on buying them a Mac? It didn't make sense to me, at least. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because most of what they were doing could have been done on a Chromebook at school. There was some, I'm sure there's some classes, and there were probably some students that felt that, that if they had only had a Chromebook, maybe they would have wanted to use their laptop for certain homework instead because of certain things on it, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's hard. And I'm sorry, I didn't do your question full diligence, as I heard. So if you said if we have X amount of dollars currently, rather than increasing, could we spend that X more wisely? Again, you're talking about our current level of access outright is not meeting our need. We have a need to increase, all the way up the chain, our current level, and to do that with the same amount of money isn't going to get us there. Is really,
But most places do not have one-to-one from 3 to 12. Most schools do not have that. And I don't really see.
So I don't have the sheet, but when I presented last May, I want to say 60% of our peer group schools did. When I reran the numbers prior to the September just to have them, 75% of our peer groups did. And in looking at some of the other things I'm looking at for the committee, there are some key schools that we were looking at. Watchung, West Windsor, Hopewell, and Livingston. We looking at them for another district research initiative. All of those schools, one-to-one, 3 of them use Chromebooks, 1 of them uses Surfaces at the high school. I looked at this for the high school. However, I can tell you that we were on a site visit for Hopewell, and they have it as low as the elementaries, and it's proven very effective for them. We are seeing an increasing trend in looking at all of our peer group schools that they are moving in this direction in some capacities. They all have their own plans. Some have started at the middle school and then rolled out similar to that alternate plan where they went from the middle school both directions out. Hillsborough did it, they initially did it lower and then have since, they went lower and then have pulled back and then just done 3 to 12, saying it was a little too much for that K2 band. But we are seeing that a lot of the schools that we would really use as a litmus test for us are moving this direction and increasing their access as starting as low as 3rd grade.
Hi. I just had a really quick question. If we were to just do what you said and flip-flop the middle school and the elementary school in the proposed plan, what does it flip-flop the numbers for the projected cost for those years, or is it stay the same? Does it stay the same?
I'm going to actually toggle backwards real quick just to get to that slide.
It's like, I think, 4.
Yeah, I know, it's like right at the beginning.
Yeah.
There it is. So you're asking if that becomes year 2 and year 2 becomes year, yes, that number moves with it.
It does.
Because that number is based off of, that number,
That's the WAM's number, no matter what.
that's the WAM's number. And you're talking about like the software, we're buying the software, whether it's the current devices or new devices, as far as security monitoring. So the main driving thing on that number is the number of devices needed to do that. Just like the driving on that number is the number of devices needed to do that. So
Okay.
that's,
So it travels.
so yeah, the number moves with it.
My other questions were already asked, actually.
I don't know how to characterize questions versus comments, so I'm going to give you my comments, which are different than questions. Technology is very important. Your numbers here are maybe at the most 0.5% of the total school budget, so you say, gee, can we afford that? Maybe we can. It certainly is changing our lives. Homework, you have to have the machines at home. And the machine that they have at home, if it's not the same one they're using in the class, there's a problem trying to do tests and things at home. And if you ask the machine at home, who was the first president of the United States, and it says Washington, I don't have to learn that, I just have to ask the machine. So that we're starting to get into areas of what is learning, what is thinking, what is knowledge. I don't buy the argument that today's students here are smarter than the students 20 years ago in the better schools in New Jersey. I don't know whether you could even prove such a thing. Technology has changed it. Is the learning, is the knowledge, is the ability to think any better today than it was? I don't know. Certainly the technology adds things to it. In some areas, the computer does wonderful things for us. Things that you would take 4 or 5 people to accomplish in the same amount of time, maybe even more. So technology is very, very important. But there's other areas where it has no application at all, although you could push the point and say, gee, I can get rid of the teachers, I can get rid of the textbooks, I can get rid of everything. I'll give the students little cassettes that teach the courses to them. So it depends on what you guys are talking about. A lot of details are missing. And I'm positive that if you were to take a cross-section of the staff here, they're not all ready for this. They're going to have to relearn how to teach and everything else if you insist that technology be part of their program. Math problems, science problems, certainly problem solving, the computer is probably great. In many other courses, though, it may not have much use at all unless you try and use it for teaching. And I think the teachers do a better job than the machines. The use in the high school, I think, is much more important than the use in the elementary school. We have to teach the kids how to think and learn and read and these other things first. And I think they should know how to do math problems too without having a computer with them, just in case they're left someplace without their computer and they have to figure out how much they need to buy a bottle of milk or something. Can devices be used in all classes? I don't think sensibly. I think you have to take a much closer look and a much more detailed look and almost outline every single course and decide how much time the computer or the devices would serve a purpose. Yes, you can say, hey, we'll put the textbooks on the devices. Admittedly, you can design the program, but is that necessary? Maybe it's a good idea. You could also design it so you don't need teachers, except to pass out the books. I think you have to really think through, not just technology. The 0.5% of the budget, it might be worthwhile spending the money. But to try and enforce this and push it through across the board, I don't think we're ready for that. Much more detail is required. Certainly, they're not going to be used continuously in the classroom. I don't think, you guys certainly can't use them continuously. You may be using it to do your presentation, but you're listening now. You know, it's a very complex subject. I think it's wonderful that we're considering technology, but I think we need a lot more detail before we vote. And the art class and what have you, I'm not sure we're ready for that. It might be good to demonstrate it, but a textbook will do the same thing. So that wasn't a question, but I think we need a lot more work before we decide how we're going to use these.
So I'm sorry, if I may throw in with the textbooks. Last year was my first year here, and we redid the AP Physics 1, AP Physics 2, and AP Physics C curricula. And as part of that process, we shopped textbooks. The quote we got from the one vendor was, X amount of dollars for the textbooks plus Y amount of dollars per year for the student access to the online accompaniments, which in the AP world, to not buy them really puts your kids at a disadvantage. However, if you bought the 6-year license for your students to have access and said, hey, I'm invested in you, I'm guaranteeing that for 6 years I will use your product and my kids will use your online accompaniments, they give you the book for free. The textbooks have even changed, that the money isn't even in the book anymore. And if you invest in them for a long enough period of time, the book is literally free. And they're really just focused on that annual online license. But that said, then, it's an increase in screen time, and it is a change. And that's why, like I said, with PD, it's extensive. If we go down this and begin to evolve, yes, you are completely correct in that not every teacher is at the stage that if I had the devices here tomorrow, they'd be ready. But that's why it's a multi-year plan, and we really do have to rely on our experts. And I would say, really, in looking at this plan here, where you can see, the final year, I don't think, no matter how we roll this out, until you hit year 4 of new devices at any particular grade band, we really wouldn't have a good metric on how effective we've been at our PD, at revising our curriculum, and at changing things to meet the needs of our kids. And that's being fully honest with, there's some things we cannot answer until the tires hit the asphalt.
Many courses, I would say, I would not want the computer with the device used in class. I would say some courses, it's mandatory. You have to use it to stay abreast of current developments in the world. But many courses, I don't want the computer in the classroom. I don't want the device. I want to interact with the teacher. I don't want to interact with the device. I don't want the device doing all the work for me. I want, personal learning. And I think you're wrong in saying that we can use it everywhere. I think it's a mistake. We won't do as good a job as the teachers, so that's my opinion.
Were there any other questions? Oh, I have a student. Do you want to open it up to the public, or do you want to have...
We'll ask the public to give their comments during the public comment session. All right? We need to get the board going back up there. We've got other agenda items. But thank you both very much.
Not a
Appreciate
problem.
your diligence and all your Q&A. Thank you.
Charger stays here.
Okay, we're up to the superintendent's report, and there's 2 items. Can I have a motion? Jen, Mrs. Horn, and a second, Dr. Dunton.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. We have our usual HIB report, but also I just want to highlight the memorandum of agreement between law enforcement and the school district. We have to annually agree to the terms of this document, and it essentially allows for the fact that sometimes there are things that happen where communication is required to occur between law enforcement and the school district. Anything involving something that could be a crime has to be reported, and we have to cooperate with law enforcement. So this essentially memorializes that, and it's an annual document that has to be done.
Did you want to do this? Yeah, okay. Okay. So are there any questions before we do the roll call? No? Okay. Roll call?
Yep. Mr. Byrne?
I have to say yes, although I didn't read the document.
Ms. Gray?
Yes?
Mrs. Dutton?
Yes.
Dr. Dutton, excuse me. Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen?
Yes.
Madam President?
Okay,
So I just want to jump in on a couple other things under superintendent's report. First, I hope that everybody had a nice Thanksgiving weekend. It's always great to have the opportunity to get together with family and reflect on what we're thoughtful for. We have a tradition at my house that's probably not unlike many of yours, where we go around the table and talk about things that we're thankful for. I'm not going to ask the board to do that tonight because, we don't want to be here till midnight. But I will just say that I know that I say every year that I'm thankful for the people that I work with and for my employment. So thanks for that. And I also just wanted to put a shout out there of thank you to Linda Woolridge and Jen Korn, two incumbent board members who ran for and were successfully elected to continue as board members. So thank you to Linda and Jen. And also to Jen White, who I see in the audience, officially congratulating Jen White, who was also elected to serve on the school board. So Jen, we look forward to working with you, and we'll get you sworn in January. So congratulations to Linda, Jen, and Jen, and thank you for being willing to serve.
so now we are up to public comment on agenda items. So if anyone has public comments, come up, sign in, and let us know. And remember to keep your comments to 5 minutes. And there'll be another one at the end of the meeting for any topic.
Good evening. I'm Alexandra Schwartz, 67 Bernard Drive. I had a quick question regarding the Technology Steering Committee update. How many devices do we actually currently have in the district? Just a total number. I'm asking because I'm trying to wrap my head around the relatively small differential between the number required to maintain the current fleet and the dollar amount required to actually move towards the one-to-one. I think the numbers were $260,000 to just maintain what we currently have, and $430,000 to move towards the one-to-one. I know that these are 4-year averages, but I don't think we have currently 3,000 devices in the district and are moving towards like 5,000 plus. So in a steady state, the difference between maintaining what we currently have and the one-to-one should be a lot bigger. So I'm wondering whether looking at the 4-year average is maybe a little bit misleading and the difference is actually a lot bigger. So I would just like to know how many do we currently have, and would it maybe be better also to look long-term what the difference is? Thank you.
Jennifer White, because I can't stay away, I have to ask questions I just need clarified. So the understanding is that for all the elementary schools, the district purchased the same amount. And then in addition to that, PTOs purchased Chromebooks as well. So I guess what I need clarified is for the plan, is the plan to take, and I'm just making this random number, let's say you bought 50 Chromebooks for each elementary school, to replace then those 50 Chromebooks for the elementary school, take the old Chromebooks and then give them to William Annan. But then what happens with the Chromebooks that were purchased by the PTO? So for example, Cedar Hill bought 300 Chromebooks over the course of a few years. So would those 300 Chromebooks, in addition to the ones the district purchased, also be replaced, and then those be given to William Annan? I just ask this because I know one of the things that come up from parents is we're not looking to have less technology than we currently have. So that needs to be clarified. And then the other thing, I just had a question. So if this is a 4-year rollout, by the time you get to the 4th year, isn't it time to start replacing then the first year of the Chromebooks? And I just didn't know where that translated. Thanks.
Does anyone else have public comments on agenda items? Okay, so I don't see any, so we'll close out this public comment period. Did you have any responses?
Okay, so let me try to jump in here on these couple of questions, and I think Alex and Tom are still over there. They'll correct me if I'm wrong. But so the current count of Chromebooks, I don't have an exact number off the top of my head, and I don't think Alex or Tom would either. I know that originally when we first purchased Chromebooks for the district a few years ago, we had purchased 1,800 Chromebooks. I believe the strategy at the time was 150 at each elementary school, 600 for Annan and 600 for Ridge. Since that time, I'm going to estimate that we've probably had donated something like anywhere, probably in the neighborhood of 20 Chromebook carts from PTOs, but I'd have to verify that number. So what we'll do, we'll spend a little bit of time. I know that Alex was working on double-checking inventory with the business office, so we can share out those numbers when we verify that inventory. I'll be happy to report out to the board and to the public on that. With respect to the question about cost, remember that the figures shown were costs for buying new devices only, and that we were looking at the differential between that cost and maintaining the existing fleet of devices. With respect to the replacement of devices at elementary schools, if we were to exercise the first option of starting at the elementary schools, it is not the vision to decrease the amount of devices at any of the elementary schools. So replacements would occur for both district purchased devices as well as PTO devices. If those devices were moved to the middle and high school, they would be replaced with new devices.
Okay, so we're now up to the approval of minutes. Can I have a motion? Dr. Dutton and Mrs. McEwen. Thank you. And we have a roll call?
Sure. Mr. Byrne?
Yes?
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Dutton?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen?
Yes.
Madam President?
Okay, we are now up to the Finance Committee report, and there are 25 items. Can I have a motion? Mrs. Gray and Mrs. McEwen.
Roll call.
And usually I give the finance report first. So I have a report from the Finance Committee met on November 20th. So we talked about the self-insurance health benefits, and I just wanted to highlight item number 25 on the finance agenda tonight. authorizes the business administrator to take all the actions necessary to implement self-funding of medical and prescription insurance for the 2018-19 school year. District employees would continue to have access to the Horizon networks that are currently available, and Horizon would continue to process and pay claims. With the self-funded insurance, Horizon will still calculate the premium, but Arthur Gallagher and Company will work with our district on risk management to ensure that the premium amount is appropriate. The next item we talked about was the William Annan HVAC project, Phase 1. Phase 1 of this project is scheduled for the summer of 2018. The project consists of HVAC upgrades at the front end of the William Annan building, which is all rooms up to the 400 wing, plus electrical service upgrades for Phase 1 and as much of the Phase 2 HVAC upgrade as is feasible. The district has a state grant for this project that will cover 40% of the project's cost. And item number 8 on tonight's finance agenda awards the contract for this project to Sunnyfield Corporation as the lowest responsible bidder, contingent upon an attorney review and execution of a mutually agreeable contract. The next topic we spoke about was the New Jersey Cash Management Fund. This is a money market fund which is operated by the New Jersey Department of the Treasury. The board designated the New Jersey Cash Management Fund as a legal depository for the 27-18 school year at the May 22nd Board of Ed meeting. Interest rates have been low for the past 8 years, so school districts have seen a low return on investment. The New Jersey Cash Management Fund has been paying 1.04% interest since September, which would generate additional interest income for the district. So starting in December, Mr. McLaughlin has proposed that the district deposit $12 million in this New Jersey Cash Management Fund. The next topic that we spoke about was My School Bucks service charge. My School Bucks allows parents to deposit funds in a student's lunch account using a debit or credit card. The maximum amount that can be deposited in one transaction is $135. For the first time in 16 years, My School Bucks is increasing the service charge from $1.49 to $2.49 per transaction. Mr. McLaughlin also noted that if parents use a check to deposit funds in a student's lunch account, there is no service charge or maximum amount for the check. The next item, Mr. McLaughlin distributed a list of fairly small projects that Mr. Harding is currently working on. Some of these projects were initiated by the PTOs or the Ridge Sports Foundation, and others were generated by needs within the school buildings. The projects initiated by the PTOs and Ridge Sports Foundation include a donation amount, but these projects may generate additional costs not covered by the donation. As a result, the Board of Education must pay part of the project's cost. Two examples are fundraiser pavers and drainage at Ridge, partially funded by the Ridge Sports Foundation, and an exterior playground water fountain with a concrete slab at Cedar Hill, which is partially funded by the Cedar Hill PTO. And once again, we want to thank all of these school organizations for their generous donations. And finally, Mr. Markarian said that the administration is currently working on answers to questions submitted by members of the Finance Committee on the rotating drop schedule, and this will be included in the December 18th board presentation. So are there any questions? Mr. Byrne?
I just have one comment on the fund investment at 1.04%. I don't think returns this year of 20% or more are out of line. So when the government gets involved and in the interest of safety, they are really handicapping us on the return that I think we could have gotten on the money. So that's my only comment. I'm not talking about risky investments, but 1.04% is terrible.
Did you want to comment on that at all? Just that I know the district is limited in the accounts that we can
Yeah,
deposit
I'm
our
not
money in.
criticizing
Yeah,
anybody here.
we're limited by the law, so. Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, can we have a roll call?
Sure. Mr. Byrne?
Yes,
Mrs. Gray?
Yes?
Dr. Dutton?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
I'm abstaining for number 5,
Okay.
and yes on the rest.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen? Madam President.
Okay. Okay. Just turn the page. Sorry. Yeah, there's 13. Okay, we're up to personnel, the Personnel Committee, and there are 13 items. Can I have a motion? Mrs. McEwen and Mrs. Korn. Did you have a committee report?
Sure. The Personnel Committee met on November 17th. First, we reviewed the questions that had been, the list of questions from the Board of Education and the public that relate to personnel regarding how it could be affected with a rotating schedule at Ridge. And these questions will be incorporated into the presentation at the December meeting coming up. Then we discussed negotiations with the BTAA, the Administrators Association. We had a meet and greet meeting. What day was that?
November 16th.
Thank you.
Same
Linda
day
always
we had
knows
all
the
the other
dates.
meetings.
November 16th, where we set some dates for the upcoming negotiations. We reviewed some of the issues in the contract at this meeting, and we're going to work on that in the December meeting to prepare for the negotiations meetings in January. Mr. Syatt gave us a brief update on some changes to the student teaching requirements in New Jersey. Student teachers now have to submit the Ed TPA portfolio. So this has been a big change for New Jersey, and the colleges are all scrambling to get this all sorted out for the students. So we reviewed that. Let's see. Oh, and then Mr. Syatt gave an update on the instructional coaching program. There was a presentation, I think about a year and a half ago, to the Board of Education at a public meeting about this program. It's basically teachers who have, for a couple periods of the day, serve as instructional coaches for other teachers. We started this program in 2010 with one coach coaching 2 periods a day, and it's been gradually increased. It's been a very effective program, as we heard in that presentation. Right now, we, because of leaves and changes in assignments, only have one full-time coach for this spring, but we expect that in the fall we'll get back up to our typical amount, so we're a little shorthanded right now. Okay, let's see. Mr. Syatt reported that we have posted the job opportunity for a student information systems administrator, which this person would be working with Aspen and other things like state reports. And then we reviewed all the items on the agenda for tonight's meeting, and I think they're mostly standard items. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, can we have a roll call?
Sure. Mr. Byrne?
yes,
Mrs. Gray?
Yes?
Dr. Dutton?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
I'm abstaining from 4, 10, and 13, and yes on the rest.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen?
Yes.
Madam President.
Okay. Okay, we are now up to the Policy Committee, and we have one item. Can I have a motion? Mrs. Gray, and a second, Mrs. Korn.
So on behalf of Mr. Fry, who couldn't be with us tonight, I wanted to report out on what occurred at the Policy Committee meeting. We basically discussed 2 regulations and 1 policy and made some minor amendments to each to address the issue of vaping in school. In the pupil smoking policy, we added a little bit of language to identify the fact that although things like vaping devices and electronic cigarettes can be used to quote-unquote smoke the traditional nicotine-based products, they can also be used to smoke things that go well beyond just nicotine and therefore can constitute drug paraphernalia, which would activate the administrator to respond in accordance with the substance abuse policy, which was also modified to recognize that drug paraphernalia is necessarily a potential for students being under the influence, and therefore students who are in possession of drug paraphernalia will be sent for drug screening. Finally, as the third piece, the regulation on the pupil discipline code of conduct was amended to have a specific consequence for the possession of drug paraphernalia in school, regardless of whether or not it's being used to actually consume drugs in school. Pure possession of the drug paraphernalia alone would carry a 3-day suspension. And those were the modifications in first reading on 2 regulations and 1 policy.
Are there any questions? No, I guess, okay, so can we have a roll call?
Sure. Mr. Byrne?
Yes?
Mrs. Gray?
Yes?
Dr. Dunton?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge?
Yes.
And Mrs. McEwen? Madam President?
Okay. We are now up to Curriculum Committee. We have 1 item. Can I have a motion? Mrs. Gray and Dr. Dunton.
I have a report.
Yes.
The Curriculum Committee met on November 16th, like you mentioned, with all the other meetings.
Yeah.
There are several new course proposals that were shared at this meeting. We have 3 new courses in the STEAM Academy. Each of them is the 3rd in the sequence. We have medical interventions, cybersecurity, and civil engineering and architecture. We also have the previously discussed micro and macroeconomics. This is an AP course that was planned last year and is a follow-up to the change that U.S. government, AP U.S. government now stands alone. And the 2 economics courses as well as personal finance will be taught in that course. And then there were 2 others that were discussed. I don't remember how long ago it was. Mr. Thorpe and Mr. Brahm came to the Curriculum Committee a number of months ago proposing a possible Ridge Senior Internship program. With the encouragement of the Curriculum Committee, they were invited to come back with a more detailed proposal. A pilot version of that was approved or endorsed by the Curriculum Committee for next year. About 40 to 50 Ridge High School seniors would participate in this program, and this received unanimous support from the committee. There's 1 other possible English language arts elective that Mr. Hunter has been investigating through Syracuse University. It's called the Syracuse University Project Advance for dual enrollment. It's an educational program that provides high school students with the opportunity to take a Syracuse University course or courses in their own school during a regularly scheduled school day. Mr. Hunter will share a formal course proposal in December. This was just preliminary information to let the committee know this was underway. And as I mentioned, that's an English language arts elective. We also received a health and wellness update from Mr. Shello and his team. The health and PE program evaluation relative to suicide prevention content was completed during this past summer. Mr. Shello's committee offered a number of recommendations, some of which are already actively in place at Ridge High School. 3 suicide prevention programs were evaluated, and the committee selected SOS, which is Signs of Suicide. This is a widely used program that the team is very pleased with. The teachers began using the curricular portion of this program this fall. It's only a small part, though, of the overall SOS recommended school-wide program for suicide prevention. Steps to having a fully implemented school-wide program will take more time and require more resources. Program materials were a step in the right direction. Now the school-wide team would have to be assembled, and a project coordinator would have to be identified to facilitate the additional steps. In addition to the SOS program, and the school-wide approach, their committee also made a number of other recommendations, including increasing instructional time for the health courses in grades 6 through 12. Specific topics considered for addition are, include coping with grief and loss, high-risk behavior, mental health and anxiety, the same at Ridge, that was for WAMS, pardon me, the same at Ridge High School, but additionally, wellness and fitness, reinstitution of the Project Adventure Course 2, and expanding yoga and stress management. It was also recommended that a parent outreach protocol be set so that parents are up to date on what is being covered in their child's health course. The curriculum committee also discussed methods for reaching maximum prospective audience members for the district curriculum forums. The advocacy committee brings upcoming forums to the attention of the PTO. Mr. Markarian is including upcoming dates and special messages from the superintendent in the Friday folders, and we encourage the members of the public here tonight to look for those and join us for those curriculum forums. This spring, there's a new state science assessment to replace the NJ Ask, which is currently given in the 4th and 8th grade. And also the biology competency test, which is given in the 9th grade. The testing will take place over 2 days, sometime between May 8th and June 7th, and details will be coming. We reviewed briefly a park refusal parent letter that went out to some parents in the district in light of their decision to refuse the algebra exam. All affected households were notified, and this is being handled on a case-by-case basis. There was a summer assignment survey that Dr. Heineman shared the results of with the committee, but there was not an opportunity to discuss in detail, so this will be carried to next month's meeting. And like finance, Mr. Markarian shared with the committee that the administration has been working on a list of board member questions for the rotating drop schedule discussion, and those answers will be included in the presentation on December 18th. That's it. Next meeting is December 8th.
Okay, are there any questions? Mr. Brahm?
I have an ongoing concern about the STEM and STEAM and the programs that are suggesting that if you take engineering and some of these courses, medicine in high school, I'll argue that it will not make you an engineer or a doctor. But my main point is that, well, not my main point, but one of the points I wanted to make is that it's the last time the students are going to get a broad-based education. If you, I took engineering, history, and some of these courses are gone. You don't get them again in the college program. If you take a liberal arts program, you're not going to get the math and science. The one thing high school has is this broad base, and it's maybe the last chance for some of these students to get that broad-based education. And when you eat into it and you take away some of the courses, and you have to, you're getting a less broad-based education. So that's my first comment. My second comment has to do with the argument that STEAM and STEM and these different programs give you an insight into career paths. But I'm going to argue when you pick engineering or whatever it is, and you take 3 or 4 courses in that one subject area, you're not getting a broad base on what career paths are. You're getting, maybe you're getting a view of what that particular specialty is. We were fortunate that our kids were able to make career choices even in college, things that they never considered doing. But I wanted to just come back, and my argument is that we should have a course at the high school to talk about careers. And I'm going to burden you for just a second. Law, accounting, medicine, teaching, insurance, manufacturing, construction, Wall Street, entrepreneurship, sales, marketing, the computer, production management, real estate, police, law enforcement, firemen, the military, research operations, radio and TV, newspapers, agriculture, service, fundraising, senior care, transportation, distribution, purchasing, hospitals, maintenance, architecture, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, civil engineering. They're all very, very different. And I think we owe to the students, if we could, to develop a program that would cover all of these in a one-year course to give them some feel for what each career path might entail. And I think that would be a super addition to the curriculum. But to try and specialize and say, gee, take engineering 4 courses or 5 courses, I think it's so darn limited, and it doesn't teach you very much about the career path. It teaches you about what you think engineers are doing. I don't accept for a second what is being taught. So I think we ought to have a new course. I don't like the idea of adding these because I think it detracts from the broad-based education that we owe our students. So those are my comments.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, roll call. Can I have roll?
Mr. Byrne?
No.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Dutton?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge?
Yes?
Mrs. McEwen?
Yes.
Madam President.
Okay. Okay, we're up to the Advocacy Committee.
Advocacy met on November 5th. Much of my report is like outdated now since we're so far into November and we're going to be meeting again next week. Just to give you the few things that we can, we talked a little bit about the voluntary random drug testing form and that the fact that all parents in grades 6 through 10 have been asked to check the status of their students' participation, either yes or no, and in the voluntary for their students, each student to be in the voluntary random drug testing pool, which will hopefully start at the beginning of the year if we get everybody to do it. And parents can check in Aspen under activities whether their child is in the pool. It'll say yes or no, or a Y or an N maybe, or be blank, I guess, if you haven't done it. But everybody should be making the choice, either yes or no. We talked a little bit about fundraising and liability insurance, and Mr. Markarian gave all the PTO presidents a handout for who is covered under the board's general liability insurance and for what, to explain what's covered for their events. He announced that the PTOs have generously donated $114,994.31 last year, and that's just of the money that we know of. We know that there's a lot more that they've donated to the schools, and we really appreciate all that they do. It's a very big total, and we couldn't do what we do in the schools without them. We talked a lot about rotating drop schedule, and Mr. Markarian just made sure that everybody understood what that means, what it would look like. And there were questions about school security, mainly at Cedar Hill in the vestibule where Strings was, and also in the vestibule at Ridge, whether they could have a pass-through window. There was questions about asphalt near the gym at Ridge. I guess there's been some potholes there that needed to be taken care of. Robin and Linda gave out a handout from school boards about how to deal with news media from school boards, and that should be in the advocacy folder. If it's not, just let me know, and if you guys need that, I'll get it to you. Just to highlight a couple things that are coming up, on December 4th, here at the Ridge Pack at 7 p.m., the Nurtured Heart Part 2. It's the second part of the Effective School Solutions program. It's going to be here on December 6th at Mount Prospect at 9 a.m. The Language Arts Department is going to be doing a presentation about grammar at the elementary schools. And on December 13th at Liberty Corner at 9 a.m. in the cafeteria, there'll be an internet safety program for elementary school parents. And and that is, that's coming up till the new year. Is there any,
Thank you,
are there
Mrs.
any questions? Thanks.
Okay. We're now up to liaison committee reports. I just wanted to say very briefly, the Municipal Alliance met on November 13th, and the main agenda item at that meeting was a presentation on the stigma-free initiative concept for mental health and substance abuse. And as a follow-up, the Municipal Alliance is having a public forum on mental health, substance abuse, and a possible stigma-free initiative in Berners Township on December 7th at 7 p.m. at the Town Hall. And that's my liaison report. So
Could you explain stigma-free?
I think the idea behind stigma-free is that just as, well, there has been in the past a stigma, people feel hesitant to talk about substance abuse and mental health issues. And the idea behind the Stigma-Free Initiative is that you would erase that stigma so people could feel free to discuss these issues openly and get help.